to work. I'm Mark Weber, I'm the curator here, and we're pleased today to have a special program in honor of Black History Month. I'm going to also take this opportunity to tell you about a few things we have coming up here at Navy Memorial. In fact, next week we have another Authors on Deck program, South Pacific Cauldron, World War II's Great Forgotten Battlegrounds by Alan Rems. And on Thursday, March 19th, we will have Against the Tide, Rickover's Leadership Principles and the Rise of the Nuclear Navy by Admiral Dave Oliver. And also on March 3rd, we will be opening our new exhibit honoring the Navy Reserve for their centennial. And then we're looking forward to Saturday, April 11th, our annual Blessing of the Fleet ceremony. So find one of our staff members, we can tell you lots more about all of those events. Our author today, David B. Almond, holds an MA in education. He's a prison chaplain and pastor of a non-denominational Christian congregation in Mojave County, Arizona, where he resides with his wife, Janice. They have 4 children. Monica, their daughter, is here today. It's been a big help in arranging this program. And 5 grandchildren. This is Chaplain Almond's first book, and we're very pleased to welcome him to the Navy Memorial. Without further ado, Chaplain Almond.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Just want to especially, again, acknowledge Mark Weber and the contribution that this organization provides with regards to the Navy Memorial. And I just also want to thank my wife, as well as my daughter, Dr. Monica Almond, back there in the back, for their assistance and support in this project. This is a story that I feel that really needs to be told. It hasn't been heard. There have been a couple of other books on this subject, but being the fact that I was one that was on board during that time, I thought that my contribution would be very helpful from a historical perspective as well. I also want to again acknowledge that this is the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. And for all those Vietnam War veterans who served, I wish to thank you for your service. And like many of us say that are part of the VFW and the Vietnam Veterans Association and other military associations, thank you for your service and welcome home. That's something that we did not get as well as compared to some of the other veterans during the time that this period took place. I also want to acknowledge the fact that there are other veterans of other wars. I had a chance to meet Dan, who's a who's a World War II veteran back here in the back, and again, I want to thank you for being part of that, as we say, the great generation, for what you guys did on behalf of this nation. I just want to take a little bit of time just to go through this book, just to give you a sample of what this is all about. And so we won't take a whole lot of time because of the fact that, the time situation is very important to be aware of. But race, as you all know, is a topic of discussion today that has some people polarized along ideological lines. This story is about a race riot in which black sailors truly believed the institutional racism that they experienced in the Navy was real. These some 150 black sailors took it upon themselves to exact revenge on what they perceived was a system of racism favored toward their white counterparts. Thus, they directed the violence that they had towards the white sailors, in many cases who were sleeping in their bunks. Whether real or imagined, these sailors forced the Navy and other branches of the military to take a serious look within their organizations. Thanks to the foresight and courage of Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, who took steps toward understanding and equal opportunity by initiating several programs such as the Upward program, designed to help educate and train non-commissioned and commissioned officers in dealing with institutional racism and minority issues. We have today a much better Navy. The other chapter I will read from is chapter 1. On my 18th birthday, January 2nd, 1973, the Special Subcommittee on Disciplinary Problems in the United States Navy of the Committee of Armed Forces House of Representatives 92nd Congress committed themselves to an opinion on the right aboard the aircraft carrier U.S.S. Kitty Hawk. On October 12th through 13th, 1972, an incident involving aggrieved black sailors aboard the aircraft carrier U.S.S. Constellation on November 3rd, 1972. As it pertains to the U.S.S. Kitty Hawk, they stated, "The subcommittee is of the opinion that the riot on Kitty Hawk consisted of unprovoked assaults by a very few men, most of whom were of below average mental capacity, most of whom had seen or been aboard for less than 1 year, and all of whom were black. This group, as a whole, acted as thugs, which raises doubt as to whether they should have ever have been accepted into the military service in the first place." In all, 22 subcommittee hearings took place between Washington, D.C. and San Diego, the home port of both Kitty Hawk and the U.S.S. Constellation. There were over 2,500 transcript pages of documentation. Out of 56 witnesses called, 30 of them were enlisted crew members from both ships. Other witnesses were subpoenaed. However, they declined to testify based on their counsel's advice due to court-martial. I was a young seaman recruit aboard the U.S.S. Kitty Hawk at the time of this historical incident that had a significant impact upon the changes the armed forces of the United States of America were forced to make. This is my story, along with those other outstanding officers and enlisted men who were and are dedicated to defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Long live the U.S. Constitution, and may we forever remain a sovereign nation true to the foundational principles of this republic. The Kitty Hawk was one of the premier carriers, had a stellar overall record in the United States Navy, but earlier in the cruise of 1972, it suffered its first loss while performing operations from Yankee Station in the Gulf of Tonkin. An A-7E fighter jet belonging to Commander D.L. Hall, the commanding officer of the VA-195 Strike Fighter Squadron, was lost at sea on March 8th. Shortly after that incident, on March 19th, another A-7E went down. As a result of that loss, all A-7Es were temporarily grounded. On March 23rd, an A-7, flown by Lieutenant D.S. Pike, vanished, and he was classified as MIA. From April 7th until May 1st, our area of operations was interchanging between North and South Vietnam. Earlier in the month, April 2nd, we were summoned from our liberty and replenishment at Subic Bay to get back to Yankee Station because of the North Vietnamese incursion across the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. That was on April 2nd. On April 14th, a F-4J fighter aircraft belonging to Lieutenant Junior Grade Greenleaf and Lieutenant C. McKinney went down, and these men were also classified as MIA. Later, another aircraft, an RA-5C, went down on May 7th, and Commander C.R. Pulfer and Lieutenant J.E. Kernan was classified as prisoners of war. All of these men were the top guns of the period who risked their lives and are symbolic of the best that is America. Most of them were Caucasian, however, one was African American. Many of them had hopes, dreams, loves, friends, and family they left behind for their belief in God and country. May their names and sacrifice never be forgotten. Sunday, September 17, 1972, was a day which bode an omen of tragic events to come. On this evening, the Kitty Hawk was operating in the Gulf of Tonkin as part of Task Group 77.7 with the U.S.S. Dewey when at 20:24 hours or 8:24 p.m., there was a report of a man overboard on the starboard side of the ship. It appeared the sailor, identified as aviation boatswain mate handler apprentice, airman apprentice, was blown off the flight deck. His name was August Ghosh, was blown off the flight deck in the course of aircraft recovery operations. The U.S.S. Dewey took the lead to direct the rescue effort. The V-1 division from the Hawk was responsible for handling aircraft on the flight deck, but had a wellboat crew in the water with the sailor in sight 5,000 yards away. Within minutes, the bridge team and lookouts of the U.S.S. Dewey and the wellboat crew of the V-1 division lost sight of the man at 20:53 hours or 8:53 p.m. Helicopters from the U.S.S. Kitty Hawk, U.S.S. America, U.S.S. Saratoga were assigned to the search, which was officially ended at 21:22 hours or 9:22 p.m. with negative results of recovery. To lose someone you knew, who was just there a moment earlier, leaves a sick feeling in your innermost bowels. I'm told it's something you never forget. The memory of this brave sailor and his sacrifice in the service of his country and that of the Republic of South Vietnam should always be remembered. This tragedy is a sober reflection of how dangerous the flight deck is and the keen alertness one must have to operate in that atmosphere. The Hawk had been one of the safest carriers. The irony of this occurrence and the incident to come afterwards can be captured in a much earlier deck log entry dated January 1st, 1972. According to Navy tradition, at the beginning of each year, a naval officer writes a poem to christen the first ship's deck log for the new year. The Kitty Hawk had an entry on that day. It reads as follows. Who is that? Who is it that's moored starboard here? Hugging relentlessly to Mike, November pier. Kitty Hawk, full of cheer, the safest carrier of the year. From the shore comes our steam, water, and power, for engineering is asleep at this hour. The Hawk is not alone, although North Island seems bare. Others are present to do their share. The Tycho, enveloped in a shell of rust, is moored just in front of us. Aft, just sitting in the bay, is the Providence, clutching Pier J. Our SOPA is VADM, or VADM Johnson, Confib PAC acronyms. He knows where we are and when we'll be back. With a readiness degree of 6 and a yoke material condition, the Hawk is ready because it's Captain Oberg's tradition. For ships that sail and planes that fly, our anchor and warning lights are bright in the sky. All mooring lines are double, cauldron burn and cauldron bubble. If my relief don't come, I'm in trouble. John David Schwab, Jr., Ensign. There was nothing truer stated than the irony of the fourth, quote, the safest carrier of the year, and the last lines, quote, if my release don't come, I'm in trouble, end quote. The extended 3 months tour of duty on the line in Vietnam was beginning to wear thin the morale of the enlisted men, rapidly disintegrating, similar to the half-life of radioactive decay, as I began to soon find out from my shipmates on board. Unfortunately, because of earlier occurrences in the month of July 1972, relief for the Hawk would come much later, owing to sabotage on the U.S.S. Ranger. The Ranger, akin to the Kitty Hawk and the Hancock, was a workhorse of a carrier for the duration of the 1971 Task Force 77 tour of Vietnam on Yankee Station. One day, in March 1971, the above-mentioned carrier set a record number of 233 strike sorties, or bombing raids, if you will, against the North Vietnamese troops focused upon the critical Laotian entryways into South Vietnam. Afterward, on June 7, 1971, the Ranger returned to the United States at Alameda, California. She remained in port for what turned out to be an unexpected 13-month overhaul caused by an unforeseen act of sabotage. In May 1972, the Ranger, CVA 61, was returned to operational status for the West Coast. She was expected to relieve the Kitty Hawk, which would have headed back to the United States in the month of July. However, the Ranger was disabled due to an unknown crew member or members immobilizing the number 4 main engine reduction gear. As per the JAG report on July 7, 1972, at approximately 1400 hours, or 2 p.m., the main propulsion assistant, in the course of a scheduled review, found a broken lock on one of several inspection plates, providing a visual of the number 4 main engine reduction gear, resulting in the drainage of the sump. It was discovered that pieces of copalite or gasket material and a paint scraper were visible. Upon further examination, when the bowl gear was jacked or moved a half revolution, it displayed negative damage, and no foreign matter was discovered at that time. In addition, the JAG report stated, quote, locks were placed on the inspection port and jacking of the number 4 main engine was commenced on 9 July, preparatory to Ranger getting underway on 10 July without incident. Shortly after 0730, on 10 July, steam was applied to the number 4 main engine, and as the engine turbine spun forward, a loud metallic noise was heard in the reduction gear, and the number 4 main engine was secured, end quote. This grinding sound, no doubt, was the sound of success for the saboteurs in preventing the Ranger from heading back to Vietnam. The engineering crew, exploring closer, found a large stud in the sump and another stud between the low-speed pinion and bowl gears. It was determined that the cost of replacement and repair to the number 4 engine would be around $550,000. Regrettably, the saboteurs had no concern about the hardship this would cause their fellow sailors waiting for their relief to come, so as to spend time with their loved ones back in the States. On November 16, 1972, the U.S.S. Ranger returned to Vietnam for her 7th Westpac cruise as part of Operation Linebacker 2. Once there, she joined 4 other carriers, the U.S.S. Enterprise, the U.S.S. Saratoga, the U.S.S. Oriskany, and the U.S.S. America. The Nixon administration was endeavoring to put pressure on the People's Republic of Vietnam to bring them back to the Paris peace table, ceasing all hostilities. One thing to be learned for certain is what you do either positively or negatively affects the entire group to which you belong. The vandals involved in the Ranger incident were an integral part in adding to the chain of events that impacted the Hawk and other ships, which experienced a sort of winter of our discontent, erupting in refusals to obey orders, riots, and sit-ins, and the very fleet depended upon the effective execution of the Operation Linebacker 1 and Operation Linebacker 2 missions, which were designed to end the war in Vietnam. As the XO Ben Cloud was walking through the sickbay, someone came out of an area, approached him and exclaimed, "They got the captain." Cloud made a turnabout, exited, and instantly began running to the aft part of the ship. His plan was to get back to the hangar deck to check on the welfare of the captain. When Cloud got parallel to the personnel office, a man in khaki pants and a white t-shirt confronted him with an unmistakable look of dread and pronounced, "They killed the captain, oh my God." Due to the emotionally charged environment while processing the evening's events without access to the facts, Cloud made a decision. The information was quite possibly credible. In his own words, he expressed, "Armed with the information that I had and the reasonableness of the situation existing as I last saw it, namely the captain being in an environment completely surrounded by a group of hostile blacks, I thought it was very, very possible that he could have been killed at that point." Cloud reasoned that the situation getting out of hand was a result of the earlier skirmish between the blacks and the Marines. His intent was for the purpose of saving lives, and that was to separate the two groups from each other to prevent the possibility of any further casualties, damage to property, and disruption of the Hawk's mission objectives. In Cloud's mind, the captain was seriously injured or dead, and he, Cloud, would have to take over command of the ship, so he acted accordingly. Cloud went down a hatchway close by the sickbay. That particular hatch goes down 4 decks to damage control central. Around midnight, Commander Cloud grabbed hold of the loudspeaker connected to the 1MC communication system linked throughout the ship and made this announcement. This is an emergency. Pay no attention to anyone else. I implore all blacks to the mess decks and all Marines to the forecastle. At this juncture, everyone on the entire ship of nearly 5,000 men became aware something bizarre was happening. Most of the crew had no knowledge an incident of a serious magnitude was taking place due to the size of the ship. I and my other companion shipmates had already been awakened by the noise coming from the passageway outside our berthing area on the O2 level, since our berthing area was aft of the forecastle, the most forward part of the ship, where the passageway ends. We heard people running, screaming, and yelling with the noise of chains, broom handles, nightsticks, or nunchucks reverberating against the bulkheads and floors as if the sailors wanted to terrorize their intended victims prior to the actual encounter. Much like Marine Captain Carlucci described the circumstances when asked by the House Armed Services Subcommittee, he stated, "I would say that the dissidents or the rioters perhaps had a carnival atmosphere. I've witnessed this chilling atmosphere before in the streets of Los Angeles as a young kid. As a 10-year-old child during the Watts riot in the long, hot summer of 1965. But now these dissidents were headed in our direction. With our lights turned on, our supervisors began organizing to prepare for battle. Rumor was circulating the rioting blacks were attempting to take over the ship. While the announcement was being made by the XO Cloud, Captain Townsend had just left the group of black dissenting sailors who were earlier in an altercation with the Marines patrolling on the hangar deck. He was in a state of disbelief at the actions of his executive officer. Townsend was moving from the aft toward the forward part of the hangar deck, inspecting planes. In his own words, he remarked, "I left the groups of blacks and hoped they would start to disperse. I was at hangar bay 2 between doors 1 and 2 with dividers doors when I heard the XO make a statement which is pretty terrifying." I'll just leave it at that with regards to the story. I wanted to just kind of share a little bit with regards to some of the things that were significant with regards to the riot. At first glance, it might appear that it was started by an incident that occurred from, as you'll read in the book, the approach of one of the legal officers that came to inquire about a fight that took place the night before we left Subic Bay. And Longapo is the city that's outside of Subic Bay. It was Soul Night, and it was the last night for all of the sailors to have their last hoorah, so to speak. You know, and as you understand, for any of you that have had relatives or are married to sailors, whether it's Coast Guard or the United States Navy or Merchant Marines, they, in this particular case, they usually stayed sometimes about 30 days, or sometimes as long. I think on this particular situation, we stayed at one point about 51 days on the line. And so when you get back, you're looking for a good time. And that's exactly what happens. You have 5,000 desperate sailors coming to town with a lot of cash in their pocket. I won't go into any more detail on that. I imagine you can imagine what's going on with that one. But I just want to let you know that it was a little bit more than what appeared to be a chief legal officer that went down and approached one of the men he suspected was involved in a fight. And they had bad blood between them. I'll kind of share that. You'll see that in the story. And what happened was that a fight broke out in two different areas of the ship, in the aft and forward mess decks. And essentially what happened, though, was that the sailor that was in question by the chief legal officer it was noticed that he was there on both occasions, but they could not pin anything on him. I will share this with you, that there was another interesting component to this as I began to do research, and that was Project 100,000 that I was not aware of, which was initiated by Robert S. McNamara, I believe that was his name. He was the Secretary of Defense at the time, earlier when he initiated this in 1966. But it really got full bore around 68 into the 70s. And essentially what they did was lowered the standards of men coming into the service at that point in order to fill the need for men in the Vietnam War in all the branches. As a result, the average age of the guys that were part of that, or the average reading level, was about 6th grade level. So even though the promises that were given to these men were not, let's say, fulfilled, it was like a dream deferred. Unfortunately, I believe all of these things became a factor, including the fact that they had an unfortunate situation with regards to how they grew up. We're talking about kids like me that grew up in the 60s. We saw President Kennedy get killed. We saw Martin Luther King get killed. We saw Medgar Evers get killed. We saw and heard of the bombings of those 4 little girls that were killed in the church back during that time with that terrorist act. So I just say this is part of the milieu or the background of the mindset of a lot of these young men that came from all over. And I'm not going to go too much further. My wife is letting me know that I have that I have to move on because of time. But let me just go through and show you the next slide. This is typical of what you would have seen if you lived in the inner cities of America around the time period of this activity in recruiting a lot of African Americans across the country. And so as you see, they wanted to identify with them and then attract them to come in. Unfortunately, the Navy was starting to move towards a little bit of a more positive area of equal opportunities, but as you know, it takes time to turn a ship around. And so unfortunately, it didn't happen fast enough with all of the things that I lay out for you in the book. This is a sample of some of my friends. Some of these guys were part of most likely Project 100,000, but these were the guys that did not participate in the riot. And so I'm in the middle of that. And at the time I was a boatswain mate. I later on made a hospital corpsman 3rd class before I got out after 3 years. And for years I always wanted to dig into the story to really get a feel of, to really understand what really took place. So I finally did. This is the ship itself, basically about 1,046 feet long and somewhere around 240 feet across in terms of width. And we had 4 elevators, to move the planes up and down into the hangar bay, and 4 catapult systems, steam related. This is Captain Townsend. I consider him one of the heroes. He's an unsung hero to me, and I had a chance, and I still have an opportunity to talk with him on occasion. We spoke about a week and a half before I came out here. He lives in Foster City, California. He was former mayor of that community. He's in his upper 80s. I think he's 88 years old now. Good man. And you'll read more about his bio and his background. This is Ben Cloud, another hero of the story. As you can see, we have 2 Americans. One happens to be white, one happens to be black. And as you'll read in the book, you'll find out that both these men, even though they had different styles of leadership, were really responsible for making sure that the riot got put down and that there were no serious loss of lives, even though there were many, many, many that were injured from this incident. And I think that these men, I gave them my gratitude for what they did, because I wouldn't be standing here today if I would have, if they didn't really do and how things ended up, by the grace of God. But because they worked together, it was remarkable. And as you know, with leadership, it's wonderful when you see leaders that really lead by example and have strong ethics and really serve their country. And here's an example of Ben Cloud again. He's in San Diego, California, still doing well. And again, the ship, replenishment at sea. My salute to all you that served and all of you that are here today that still serve. I want to thank you for what you do every day to protect us. And I salute all the veterans, especially those that we recognize the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. For all of you relatives that had people that were part of that, husbands, grandfathers, brothers, sisters, I salute you as well for being a support for them. And this is, as you know, this is here in Washington, D.C. I took this one day when I came. It was a somber time for me as I reflected on that period of time in our history. These men that really didn't get a welcome home. And so I just, again, wanted to have us reflect on that on this 50th anniversary. And that concludes, our talk. Do we have any questions at this time?
I have two questions.
Sure.
How many were involved in the riot of Kitty Hawk? And were these the only two ships that had riots, or were there lots more?
Good question. Regarding the first question, there roughly were, out of close to 5,000 men on board at the time, just under 5,000. There were a total of 150 men that were involved in the riot. There were 29 that were up for charges. One was dropped, and out of the other remaining 28, I believe 22 were in charge with at least one count of being a part of the riot. And regarding other, let's say, disturbances, yes, there were other disturbances. But we didn't know at the time, but the U.S.S. Constellation heard about our incident, and there was a sit-in that took place down in San Diego where there were some close to 300 black sailors that refused to go back on board because they were trying to get recognized for having some change being done with regards to living conditions and things of that nature, working conditions. The U.S.S. Hasayapa had an incident with a riot shortly after ours as well, and this just continued to reverberate throughout the United States Navy. And as a result of this, my opportunity that I had the other day with Chaplain Black, the head of the U.S. Senate, he's retired Admiral in the United States Navy and is now the chaplain at the Senate. They're doing a story about his book, or not a story, but a movie about his book coming soon. He was reflecting on that. He says, yeah, it's interesting, because 1976, he says, I went in. And this is after all that. And so the wheels of change began to turn better by the time he got in. And again, this is something that is an ongoing thing that we can't forget, from the standpoint of we need to learn from these lessons and continue to reflect and move forward from that. And so, hopefully that's some help to you. So, anybody else?
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
As you have been through an interesting series of careers. I know we talked earlier, and you went from a sailor, you were an EMT, and
right.
now you are a chaplain. So
right.
were there Navy chaplains that inspired you during that time? Anything you'd like to reflect on in terms of how chaplain aboard the Kitty Hawk might have addressed some of the turmoil that was going on?
I appreciate that question. That's really a good question. To be honest with you, at the time when I was a boatswain, we were working so hard, 12, 16-hour days, 30 days out at sea or 31 days out at sea at a time, that I really didn't get involved with the chaplain. There were services that took place, I know, but the thing about it is that from my experience, I didn't have any involvement with the chaplain. So I really can't address that from my own experience. I'm sure there were others that did, but again, you have to think it's a small city selling amongst the islands of the world. It's a floating city that's out there. So yeah, but I appreciate the question. Yeah.
Were there black chaplains that might have reflected a religious tradition for those crewmen, or was I'm just wondering if perhaps that wasn't something that was maybe a missing ingredient?
Yeah, actually, because of the fact that the United States Navy was, again, I'm really grateful for my opportunity that I had to experience the United States Navy. It was a great experience for me and a great opportunity for me. Unfortunately, because of the fact there were so few blacks in leadership positions in lower management levels as well as the higher levels, I just didn't have that experience. It was encouraging to see those few that I did come across, but I didn't have much experience because I was only on board for 9 months before I went to Corps School in San Diego. But it was very encouraging when I did see a black officer like Ben Cloud, or like there was another officer, I didn't know his name, that was a pilot on the ship. That was encouraging when we saw that. And then when I saw like first class petty officers that were in that position, that was very encouraging. But again, out of 5,000 men, there's only 300, 300 blacks altogether. So that's kind of my experience. So, yeah. Anyone else? All right, wish to thank you all for coming here again. It's been a pleasure for me, and I'd like to thank again Mark Weber and his marvelous organization for what they do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And on behalf of our President, Admiral Todashek, and all of us at the memorial, we have a few little gifts for you. This is a print of the chaplain's plaque on our Navy Memorial outside. So I think maybe a little something drawing together your Navy past and your current career vocation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for coming.